blocker of Hextall. Fed around to the far side. Flyers a little lax in picking up Robinson, who puts it cross ice off the body. Breakaway Eklund. He's gone for the hat trick. He's in. Shot. Score. Hat trick, Pelle Eklund. That for Philadelphia in their history is their 12th playoff hat trick, and the other one this year, Tim Kerr against the Islanders in the first game of that set.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 195. It is the calm before the training camp. Or is it? We're brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. And a couple things have broken even as we were planning to do this show. So we got a few things to talk about and some late-breaking Flyers staff announcements. But hey, let's get to our panel. Always to the left. Chef B, how are you, my friend?
Good. What are we? We're 3-4 weeks away from preseason, and then 6-7 weeks away from regular season. I'm totally looking forward to this. I'm so excited.
Yeah, not even. It's actually less time than that. I'll break that down. That's one of the other things we'll break down. And the great Dan Silver, what's on your mind, brother?
Just been doing a lot of traveling. Glad to be back home, and I guess we're coming up on Flyers season. There's a lot going on, so it's I was going to say it's the end of summer, but it's still pretty hot. So pretty hot.
Especially here in Florida. Yeah, but yeah, there's actually quite a lot going on. I'm going to amend what I said right before the show in terms of what I'm going to talk about. Just let's get some dates going, so people have some concrete dates they can lean on. The Flyers rookies will report on Wednesday the 13th. So that's a week from when we're recording. They'll be on the ice actually on Thursday the 14th. The Flyers main training camp starts a week later on the 21st. That's when the veterans are here, and many are in town already. Okay, so from there, the Flyers will have a rookie series with the Rangers on Friday the 15th in PPL Center. At PPL Center in Allentown, and then the next day on the 16th, late in the afternoon, at a 5 o'clock start on that one. These are rookie games. Then the exhibition games start on Monday the 25th at the Devils. They have an exhibition opener on the 30th, again versus the Devils, a Stanley Cup contender, whether we like it or not. The Flyers' regular season begins Thursday, October 12th, and their home opener will be versus the Canucks Tuesday, October 17th. And we'll leave it there with the dates. Also, before we get rolling, we're going to talk about some of this KHL stuff. The Flyers, in a late-breaking announcement by Chris Mayer from Mayer Media, he deserves credit on this one. The Flyers have made some staff changes, and some things have stayed the same. For starters, Bob Clark, Paul Holmgren, and Bill Barber are still senior advisors. However, Bob Murray, ex of the Anaheim Ducks, their general manager for years, who was let go based on professional conduct violations by that organization, is now a senior advisor. And apparently Keith Jones had pushed for that hire. Let me tell you, for the way they draft and develop in Anaheim, that is a nice pickup. As announced earlier by Charlie O'Connor, Danny Heatley has been hired as a pro scout. So we have some people coming in and coming out. So Greg Chase, who worked with Danny Briere in Maine in the ECHL, has been hired as a pro scout. In addition, Daniel Tremblay, who was formerly a scout with the Gatineau Olympiques in the QMHL, has also been brought in. Mike Eastwood, who was an NHLer over 700 games, has replaced Dave Brown as a director of pro scouting. Brownie is still with the organization, however, in a lesser role. John Chapman, who was an amateur scout and pro scout for the Flyers from 95 to 23, has retired, along with Al Hill, who was with the Flyers in the late 70s, early 80s, was a pro scout from 98 to 23. He has also retired. Al Hill, of course, fans of my age will remember for that 5-point debut, 2 goals, 3 assists out of nowhere. Nobody knew who this guy was. We didn't have internet. We didn't know who was playing. Who was it? Was it Maine Mariners or was it Richmond? I don't know who it was. Those are some of the changes announced by the Flyers. Dan, just any feedback on that before we move on?
Nothing really specific on those changes, honestly. I mean, it's stuff that's going to go on behind the scenes that we'll see if this group pans out or doesn't pan out in terms of the behind the scenes guys. I mean, they've made a lot of changes from the start of when they brought in Keith Jones and Danny Briere, bringing in guys like Leclerc and Patrick Sharp. I mean, there's a whole new group of folks, and I think that most fans are not going to have a whole lot of interaction with these folks, and I think we just need to see how each of their roles develops. So I don't really have too much of an opinion on some of these changes.
Yeah.
Well, people out there were crying to change, weren't they? Remember, they just didn't want like the GMs done. They wanted to clean the whole house, everybody, player development, analytics, everybody. They didn't get all of that, but they get a decent amount of change. So, I think at this point it doesn't hurt. It's too early to say if it's gonna, like Dan said, if it's gonna pan out. But I don't see it being too upsetting because you wanted a fresh take on everything, and there's definitely enough guys to come into the room now and into the system here and actually show us what a fresh take is, not just the same old good old boys. I mean, of course, the senior advisors, they weren't going to change. We know that, but it's just the input that they're going to get from them is probably going to be limited. I feel anyway.
No, I agree with that. No word on Dean Lombardi. I'm just curious. That might be something we're going to have to do a little research on, because you would think that somebody like Bob Murray, who's been in the league more recently, would kind of step into those shoes. But I don't want to make any assumptions. I don't want to give out bad information, but might want to take a look at that. Dean's the kind of guy who really wasn't really willing to take on a lot of responsibility above being an advisor. And I'm not sure what that circumstance is. But hey, let's jump to the thing that everybody's talking about right now. We do have more to talk about. In the KHL, there's been a lot going on. Some of it seems very political. Some of it also seems like typical Russian KHL crap. And what we want to do tonight is give you some perspective. It's something I think it's lacking on Twitter, especially when it comes to Matvei Michkov, and not necessarily with Fedotov. I think that's a different circumstance. I think something could, Kolosov not getting a start after getting a shutout. But what does that mean? What does it all mean? So we're trying to sort this out, and we're going to lean on what's going on with Michkov, because people are kind of freaking out a little bit because he gets his first game action. He only got 6 minutes and 12 seconds of ice time over 11 shifts, and he was supposed to be on a second line, which he clearly was not. So, Dan, I'm going to turn to you. There's been a lot of people weighing in with their opinions, kind of white-knuckling every aspect of this thing, knee-jerking, writing some really great articles, but maybe they don't have the right perspective. What say you?
Human beings in general like having control over things. And unfortunately, this is a situation where we don't have a lot of control over the situation. This is part of the reason why Matvey Michkov dropped to number 7 in the draft. It's not just because there were some teams that he kind of gave the vibe to that he didn't want to play for. It's because he has a 3-year contract in the KHL in a country that's at war right now, and that is also, has all sorts of different political machinations going on there. He's there for 3 years, and he's also playing for a team with a head coach who's basically the son of Putin's best friend and who really doesn't know a whole lot about hockey, or at least has not had much experience coaching hockey, in Roman Rottenberg. He's one of the, probably the wealthiest, most influential people in Russia, if not the world. But he's got a tremendous ego. He doesn't know a lot about hockey. He installed himself as the GM and the head coach. He's even been on the ice, during some of the preseason, playing a little bit. And Michkov's got a 3-year contract there. So I am guessing that obviously Michkov during the preseason got in a number of games. He played very well, and Flyers fans, justifiably so, are extremely excited about Michkov and the fact that we got him at number 7 and he could be a potentially generational talent like a Bedard. But it's going to take patience. And so the current situation that's going on there is he played a decent amount in the preseason. He was good. They had a 3-on-3 preseason tournament. He was named the MVP. But SKA, the team that he's on, St. Petersburg, is typically the best team in the league. They've got a lot of older players. Additionally, you've got Rottenberg, who has a tremendous ego, and I'm guessing that he probably did not like sort of what happened around the draft, where, one of the reasons Flyers fans were so excited about Michkov is that he came in, he was drafted, he was super excited. He was talking about how his dream is to come to the NHL and win a Stanley Cup with the Philadelphia Flyers. And he's posting photos on Instagram of him wearing, New York sporting gear and all this kind of stuff. And if you put yourself in the shoes of a Russian oligarch who probably looks down upon the rest of the world and looks down upon the NHL, and he sees this 18-year-old kid doing this, it's not that hard to understand why this guy may be treating Michkov a little bit differently than some of these other guys. I'm not saying he definitely has an axe to grind against Michkov, but what we're seeing, he didn't dress in the first 2 regular season games for SKA. Of course, Flyers fans were kind of freaking out about that. He played today on the 3rd line at wing. They had him at center a little bit in the preseason. Obviously, mainly he's played wing to this point in his career. They had him on the 3rd line on the wing. Murat Kuznetsov was centering, and he's a really good Minnesota Wild prospect. He only got Michkov only had 8 minutes in the game. I think he had no special teams play, and there's been rumors that Anthony Sanfilippo today on Snow the Goalie talked about how he thinks that Michkov is ultimately going to end up with another team. Like last year, Last year he was loaned out to Sochi in the KHL, which I think is the same ownership as SKA. Of course, the problem there is that last year when Michkov was in Sochi, that's where his father mysteriously wound up dead in a pond. Does it have something to do with the fact that his father was rumored to be trying to get him out of his KHL contract? Who knows? But either way, the memories are not good for Michkov of being in Sochi, so it seems unlikely that he would want to go there. But I don't think for the next 3 years, Michkov is going to have much choice, unfortunately, in what's going on. And I see on Twitter a lot of things like Flyers fans being like, why doesn't Comcast just pay SKA and the KHL a ton of money to bring him over here? Michkov will just end up over in the U.S. sooner if they keep treating him like this. He doesn't have control over it. And if he leaves Russia, like under the cover of night without his family, the same thing might happen to his mom and his siblings as what happened to his father. So it's just a really bad situation. And we just have to kind of hope that the fact that he's super skilled will eventually win out and that Rottenberg will want to play him on the team. But it's going to be a bumpy ride. And unless something unforeseen happens, I wouldn't necessarily think that there's a way that he could come over here before his 3 years are up. And that's sort of just the reality of the situation. I think Flyers fans are going to have to sort of take a step back and not be as reactive to everything that happens over there, because there's going to be a lot of things happening during his development that are not really going to be ideal. But that's all part of, as I started this ramble off with, that's all part of why he dropped to number 7. We don't have control over it, and the Flyers don't have control over it to a certain degree. So it's going to be a tricky situation here moving forward with Michkov. You just kind of have to step back a little bit and see the long game.
Yeah, I would add this. I would say Michkov is, like you were saying, really kind of showy with his desire to be in the NHL. And if I'm a guy like Rotenberg, an oligarch's son, who has that kind of power in the country, big ego, probably used to getting his way, like a spoiled kid, looks at Michkov as maybe someone who was coddled on the way up, being so talented and being the best guy in his group up until this point in his career, as maybe a bit of a punk who needs to earn his ice time. And this is a battle of really bullheaded people, and the guy who's in charge is going to get his way. There's a Russian way, there's a KHL way, and it might not be something that strikes us as logical, but they don't think the way we do. And I think we have to go through a process as fans. Like Dan said, it was baked in to taking Michkov at 7, and he was available there because of circumstances like this. What we have to do is keep that in perspective. And there was a real good article on Sportsnet about this type of phenomenon and what was going on, and how, Michkov is not a perfect player. He's not a unicorn. He's a really good player. Okay. And I'm just going to read this one little portion. And I think it's Jason Bukala, who's a scout. If I'm butchering that name, please accept my apologies. And it goes like this. Michkov's journey to Philadelphia will be flush with challenges over the next several seasons. Flyers fans will lose patience at times. There will be several highs and lows until the 2026 season arrives. This journey will require patience and perspective. Michkov is 18 years young. He has time on his side. Hopefully, he finds a home with one team that's willing to give him a chance to play to his strengths and work through his weaknesses. Close quote. And that's kind of where I'm at, combined with a lot of things, that I emphasized and what Dan was saying. Chef, what do you have to add?
Unless you're going to, like Dan said, unless you're going to go over there and like hire a team of SEALs to break him out, him and his family, and smuggle him out. I mean, you gotta be patient with this. Plus, there's also a decent amount of veterans on that team, that KHL team too. So he's at the bottom of that list, and like factor in the Russian mentality, and a lot of that I do believe is an older school mentality, like, and where you got to pay your dues, and you didn't get this, you've been handed a lot of stuff. You need to earn it now. So I'm not surprised by any of that. But, I think everybody's just got to relax too, because it's only been like 3 games. It's not the end of the world yet. 3 games versus 3 years. He's going to be playing hundreds of games coming down the line here. And the panic about the first 3 because he only got 8 to 10 minutes or whatever, isn't the end of the world right now. So, I mean, that portion of it, I can see how fans get upset because they think they're losing out on their investment on this team, because a lot of people are so fired up with Michkov, but then it's like that delayed reaction. Oh, it's like putting like the presents under the Christmas tree at Thanksgiving. It's like you can't open it, and those kids are staring at those presents for all those days, and they can't open that present because it's not Christmas yet. And it's the same. It's like the same thing. We got a nice little present coming. We just can't unwrap it yet.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Derek over at the Liberty Yell, check him out on Twitter, and over at that, I think it's thelibertyyell.com, wrote a really good, thoughtful, logical piece about why Michkov should be playing and what an asset he'll be. And I thought it was a great piece. He's such passion. He writes very well. And it's hard to write that well analytically. So I got to give him a kudos for that. But I would also say that logic is not really playing the largest role here. So what we have to do is chill and take it in perspective, because if we don't, it's just going to be an exercise in frustration. So watch this guardedly. I would lean on some of the more senior people out in the media and pundits to get the perspective of how things are actually going. And there's some good sources out there. So let's try and enjoy it. It's not like Fedotov. Now, Fedotov, Dan, they're just skirting the IIHF and saying, giving them the middle finger. And that seems like it's political. That seems like, hey, he didn't have a contract for this year, not recognizing that the Flyers had told the deal because the player wasn't available, and the contract should be enforced like the IIHF said.
Yeah, I mean, Fedotov's situation is basically just the KHL and CSKA just being like, hey, we were going to do whatever we want here. Last year the Flyers signed the guy to a contract, and before he can come over, they whisk him away to go serve a year in Siberia, right? Like, they clearly didn't want him to come over to the United States. Then Fedotov finally does his year in the Army, and who knows, maybe he was ready to come over to the U.S. The Flyers basically put something out that their expectation was that the contract rolled over to this year. And again, the CSKA and Russia, the KHL, were basically like, no, we're doing whatever we want. We're not honoring that contract. He's signed a contract for this year with CSKA, and he's playing in Russia. It doesn't seem like Fedotov had much choice in the matter. Who knows? Maybe he did. And certainly the International Ice Hockey Federation came out and said that they were in support of the fact that the Flyers still have a contract with him, but none of it matters, right? I mean, really the only leverage that the IIHF has is sort of, if Russia ever wants to start playing in international competition again, like the World Junior Championships or like the Olympics, and also some international transfers that they might want to do, like those are not going to be allowed by the IIHF. So, but at this point, it just, they don't care. The Russia doesn't really care about it. So we'll see. I mean, the Flyers, you mentioned Alexei Kolosov, who's one of the better young goalie prospects in Russia. And the Flyers signed him to his ELC before this year started, and then loaned him out to, what is it, Dynamo he's on?
Dynamo Minsk, yeah.
And he had a shutout in his first game. So hopefully Kolosov maybe will come over after next year. I mean, he's got the contract with the Flyers already signed, so he's Belarusian. He's not Russian, so they can't whisk him off to the military, at least based on the current laws. They seem to be able to make up laws as they go. But he's a guy that now he's got that contract. Hopefully after this year, maybe Kolosov will come over and be in the AHL for the Flyers next year. But yeah, no, it just seems like basically these guys want to do whatever they want. So with Michkov, we just have to hope that they don't somehow force Michkov into signing another contract over there. I mean, it seems unlikely, but again, it seems like anything goes over there. So we'll see what happens.
I wanted to mention too, I forgot to say this about the whole other Michkov situation, since Dan did bring up like the three leagues involved in all this. I do believe they are, because people have touched upon it and said about buying them back. Comcast has all this money, they can just pay for him to come over and buy out his contract. I don't think they're allowed. I don't think they're allowed to right now, because there's no agreement because of the Russians of the war with Ukraine. Right? That agreement doesn't exist anymore between the KHL and the NHL that they can do that. Correct? Yeah.
You mean a transfer agreement?
I don't believe they can. I think that's suspended.
Yeah, right. That does not. Yeah, you used to be able to basically the NHL or NHL team used to be able to buy out a player's KHL contract. That is not allowed anymore. So if Michkov wanted to come over here and break his contract, he would literally have to defect from Russia.
That's what I thought.
Right?
Yeah,
so.
Because people out there are saying that, why don't they just do? They can't do that. They're not allowed. They wouldn't stand. He wouldn't be able to play here, I don't think so.
Yeah, that would be like Fetisov or something back in the Soviet era. I mean, it's what we've been looking at. So, yeah. So that's how I would just chill out on this, okay? Otherwise, it's just going to be frustrating. We don't have control, but we wouldn't have had the player if it was going to be smooth. That's one of the things about drafting the Russian players. You don't have the control over the development that you would almost anywhere else in the world. But have faith, he's worth it. He's the most talented player we've had in the system probably since Peter Forsberg. That's a lot.
Yep.
Okay? Just patience. Good things come to those who wait. But I would also say trust but verify. Okay, so next piece of business. if we're done with that, I'd say one thing: Team Canada. I don't know. I don't care until they announce something.
Nope.
I can't speculate what's going to happen. We'll just deal with the circumstances as they come up. You would think they're going to announce something before the veterans start showing up, but I don't know. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to move on. When we hear something, we hear something. Morgan Frost. I'm hearing from pretty good sources that it's going to get done. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know if it's going to be 2 years, 4 years. I don't know if it's going to be 3 or 3.5 or 4. I don't know. I don't know. But Keith Jones was speaking to Ant Sant Philly and said something, we're close. And there's every reason with the player in town to believe that it's going to get done. And it's just a matter of what we think. Chef, whether you can imagine Morgan Frost signing his contract and getting first line minutes right away while the Flyers break in somebody like Couturier, who maybe eventually would supplant Frost in that role if he's able to, come up to a certain par that he had set prior to his almost 2 years off.
I mean, for me, I think, and maybe you guys would agree, I think the thing that's holding this up is the term. I think the Flyers don't want to go too long with this. It's more of like a show me kind of contract. Yeah, you did a little bit last time at the end of the season. You picked it up, but we want to see if you can sustain that. So I'm guessing it's probably Frost wants more than 2, maybe 3 or 4, but I don't think I don't see it going more than 2. And I just think that's because, then it's into what you're in the, I'm not sure when's the UFA. That's 4. So I'm thinking that's probably why they're trying to hedge their bets on it. That's just a personal opinion. I have no information. I'm just guessing.
Okay, Morgan Frost is an RFA now. He is a UFA. He's a 17 draft. So it goes by also the number of games he's played. I am actually not
4,
sure. I know he's not
years. And you don't want to run into that and then, whatever. So, but I that's just a guess from me. I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to look. I'm working on that. Dan, you want to chime in while I'm looking up so I can get the right answer here?
Well, I mean, I've heard some rumblings. I don't know if they're accurate or not, that there's still kind of a divide between Tortorella and Keith Jones and Danny Briere about Morgan Frost's eventual fit on this team. And look, there's clearly a reason that this contract has taken so long in getting done. I personally never believed last year when Tortorella was sort of saying he was warming up to Morgan Frost at the end of the year. I still think that Briere has one feeling about Morgan Frost and that potentially John Tortorella may feel differently. I also can remember during some Flyers broadcasts that I'm not sure how much Keith Jones seemed to enjoy Frost's style. So and I've heard some things. So, I still have some concerns about Morgan Frost's long-term fit in Philadelphia because bottom line, I'm not sure that he's John Tortorella's kind of player. And no matter what Tort says, I don't know if I believe him. So I would say that I do have some concerns about the Frost Flyers situation right
now. Okay. That kind of goes against the grain from what I'm hearing, but that's okay. If you got some different information, then I can understand. And certainly the rationale for what you're saying definitely makes sense. In terms of the answer I was seeking, which I don't have for you concrete in terms of when he would actually be a UFA, I'm frankly not sure. And I don't want to I'd rather not give you any information and give you wrong information. But certainly it would be at least 2 years, probably 3 before he's a UFA. And that's just a guess.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing with Frost, by the way, is that Couturier is coming back this year. Noah Cates is one of John Tortorella's favorite players. We've got Cutter Gauthier on the horizon, who they want to try and have play center. where's Morgan Frost fit? Are they going to try and move him to a wing? Potentially. He spent most of last year at center. I just combine with how I think that John Tortorella feels about him and combine with the fact that I'm not sure where his positional fit is. I won't be surprised if it's a kind of a rough year for Morgan Frost.
I agree with that.
I wouldn't be either. But I think that with the idea that Gauthier is not a lead pipe cinch to be a center at the NHL level, and the fact that they really haven't drafted anybody of that ilk yet, I mean, the opinion of Morgan Frost could swing on what happens in the draft next year. I mean, he may be a useful player, but then they look at him and say, wait a minute, Couturier's come back. We have, Noah Cates. Now, where does he fit? Since we drafted X amount of player and we know we can, the player X in the next draft, and it's not a defenseman, it's actually a center. And Gauthier is going to move out to the wing where we kind of think he's going to be anyway. And that's just presupposing that. Then I could see that. But right now, as things stand, as the Flyers are still in the beginning of this rebuild, he could really be a useful player. So if they sign him at the right amount, how long is Tortorella going to be here? That's the other thing. I think Danny Briere, who probably holds, the largest sway in this circumstance, is probably the biggest advocate among the big three who are making decisions right now. He's probably more in Frost's corner than anybody. So I think it might be a little bit of a tug of war because I'm kind of in the Tortorella camp. I'm not exactly sold, but on the other hand, I could see that Frost could really be useful if they want to have the flexibility to put Gauthier on the wing and they draft a defenseman because a defenseman is tougher to get maybe than the center, or they rate the defenseman higher in this upcoming draft. I would not pass up a top defenseman. I mean,
in this draft coming up, there's supposed to be some really good ones out there. So
yeah, absolutely.
I can see that. I can see them hedging their bets and hoping that Gauthier can handle a center load. But that's a year and a half away from reality either way. So I think you need to go. I think you sign like Dan says, because since his future is up in the air, I think I'm signing him short term. And if it's that way, it's like a nice little comfortable contract that if you can get somebody's offering somewhere down the line, it's something you can move and make room for later and maybe get third or fourth round pick out of it. Maybe.
I think it's fairly likely that Frost will end up signing a 1-year deal, maybe a 2-year deal. I think Elliot Desnoyers is a guy who, as soon as this year, John Tortorella may become more infatuated with than Frost. I mean, you look at Desnoyers, what he's done in the AHL. I thought he was extremely impressive in his game in the NHL. It was either 1 or 2 games I think he played in the NHL, and Tortorella was very impressed with him. He's a very similar player to Noah Cates. And I could honestly see Tortorella watching him play and being like, I think this guy's better than Morgan Frost right now. So that's a guy who maybe he'll start the season in the AHL, but I think Desnoyers is really going to move his way up the depth chart on this team. And his natural position, I think, is center. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on. I know that Garnett, I'm just looking at kind of like what these lines might look like this year. And I guess it depends on who they move to left wing. But this team's pretty light down the left wing. I wouldn't be shocked if Frost somehow ends up, on the left wing this year. Probably more likely that he's a third line center, but I won't be shocked if he ends up on the wing.
Well, with Paling in the lineup, you can make the case that Lawton is now a winger, and that's one spot.
Yep.
And then you got Farabee. So now you're talking about a third line shift for somebody, or you bring
Garnet Hathaway is probably the third line left wing, right?
It could be.
Delorier. Yeah. Right now, I've got on my chart Farabee, Lawton, Hathaway, and Delorier down the left. But if they want, that leaves Konechny, Tippett, Atkinson, and Forster on the right. So if you're probably not going to want one of those guys on the fourth line, which means you got to move one of them over to the wing. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, there's going to be some battles, and when we have our training
just to
camp,
respond to what Jeff was saying, that it is there's a lot of good defensemen in the draft next year. Looking at this point, however, if the Flyers get a top 3 pick, I don't think they'd go defenseman unless they trade down, because you've got Macklin Celebrini and you've got Ivan Demidov and you've got Cole Yzerman, who are probably going to be the first 3 picks in the draft next year. And there's a lot that can happen between now and then, but I wouldn't assume we're going to end up with a defenseman with that first pick.
Yeah, there's a lot of ifs in there. I mean, obviously those guys are rated X for what they are now versus what they're going to be rated when May comes around. And of course, Demidov is not good because he got scratched today, right?
So, and also too, we forget don't they have 2 first rounders?
Little KHL humor there. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Who's that?
Yeah, they have their first rounder, and they have the Panthers' first rounder, which
Panthers.
is top 10 protected, I think. But you know, if the Panthers have a bunch of injuries, certainly that pick could end up in the 11 through 16 range. And I think in that range, you're probably looking at a defenseman. It would be my guess, but we're too far out. But there are a ton of defensemen who will probably go in the top 15 of the draft next year.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. I think the Flyers are going to grab one. They need one, that's for sure. This is not something we necessarily prepared for, but off the top of my head, any players out there that you wouldn't mind PTOing?
I'm not falling for that
any
trap.
Vets out
that
there
was a lot of chatter with the Wayne train out there. So no, I don't.
Oh no,
I don't think
no,
so. I don't think there's anybody. I think what you have enough here right now that if you're going to start rebuilding, it's not going to be from somebody that you do on a PTO. Am I right there? I mean, at least.
Well, I mean, I heard Rachel from Locked On Flyers talk about Ethan Bear, and can you get enough defensive depth? And if he gives you the opportunity to give Emil Andre, who seems more or less committed to North America, and Dan, you can correct me if I have the read on that wrong. Then
it sounds like he's going to play in North America this year, even if it's the Phantoms.
Right. So if he's better off in the Phantoms, and a guy like Bear can help him and fill a gap until that comes, then I wouldn't be against that, because Ethan Bear is a decent defenseman who's like in the 6-7 realm, and I think he's right-handed. So I think that's not a bad thing. I mean, look, if that could hold back a guy like Ronnie Attard. So I don't know. There's a lot of balls in the air.
I wouldn't be bringing in a PTO. I mean, I look at some of the guys they brought in as free agents, and you talk about Hathaway and Paling, and you've got Delorier, but with those guys, and you brought in Sean Walker and Mark Stahl. Well, those guys to me are like borderline PTO type guys,
No, I hear you. Although I think Hathaway's a little bit above that, but
Paling is probably kind of like that. I mean, all those guys are probably a little bit above a PTO level player, but it's not that big of a difference. And for a team like this that isn't going to be competing for a playoff spot, I would not be bringing in any PTO guys. I think the roster's deep enough.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, so with that, we're going to wrap things up. We're going to be back with a training camp preview show within the next week, 10 days or so. But until then, let's get some final thoughts from people. Chef, you're up first.
I turn my AC up or down so much to just make it feel like it's cold in here. So I'm missing hockey big time. So, but I think it's gonna be a lot of up and downs this year. I just think just hang in there. This team might surprise us at how long they stay relevant. I won't say playoff hunt, but relevant. And they could play spoiler to a lot of other teams. And then, but either way, I think you're going to see a lot of growth in this team this season. Maybe not a lot of wins, but a lot of growth. And I think that's how I'll leave it today. And you can reach me at Chef to the left B, Chef to the left B on Twitter. Thank you.
Fantastic, Dan.
Oh, colleague, I like the new jerseys. I saw a photo of Tyson Forrester in one today on Twitter. I thought it looked pretty sharp. The other thing is what's interesting is that right now both the Inquirer and the Athletic don't have Flyers beat writers. Obviously, Charlie O'Connor, who's done such a good job over at the Athletic, is leaving the Athletic for a new venture, which I guess they're going to announce soon. And also, the Inquirer doesn't have a Flyers beat writer because Gianna Hahn is leaving the Inquirer. And Olivia Reiner is going to cover a different team. So neither of those publications have a Flyers beat writer. And obviously Bill Meltzer does a fantastic job, but he is also a Flyers employee. So it's almost like we're bereft right now of who's going to be the non-Flyers employee covering this team. And I don't know if the Athletic's even going to hire someone. I think they don't have anyone covering the Sixers right now. I'm not sure about the
I think Russ Joy was talking. Matt Gelb is like the only dedicated.
He's the Phillies guy,
or
right?
a major in the Phillies.
Right? I don't know what path the Athletic is heading down, but we've been so used to Charlie's really good coverage, and then it's just strange not to have an Inquirer. I wonder if Gianna Hahn just got sick of dealing with John Tortorella or something like that, and was part of the reason she didn't want to cover this team. But yeah, we're gonna have to see what happens with the coverage.
Yeah, I mean, somebody hire Dave Isaac, please. I mean, he was like one of my favorite guys. He was fantastic, great guest, very insightful. A lot like Kevin at ESPN.
ESPN,
we have one. Yeah, he's terrific, Kevin Durso, and very similar. I would love for that to happen. It'd be great to have Dave back on the beat, but I wouldn't blame him for making sure everything's so shaky right now with media. And as soon as the New York Times bought them, regardless of what, political leanings, left or right, but you had to be suspicious because the very reason that the Athletic was created was to fill a gap vacated by publications like the Post and the New York Times. So it's a shame. And I don't know if I'll be keeping up with my subscription as a result. And it's the same thing with Philly hockey now. I mean, a lot of people are critical of Sam Carcini, but he really writes well in the abstract or when he's looking back historically. And his replacement is a good guy. He's competent, but do you want to pay for that? I'm going to wait and see where Charlie is. And God bless Charlie. I wish him all the best in his new venture. And by the time we get back here, maybe we'll have a clue as to where he ends up. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up by giving people just a lowdown. The O&B Puckcast is available at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on Twitter. On Getter, it's at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. As an alternate, we're available on roughly a dozen podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible, Google. We have a YouTube page. Just plug in there, O&B Puckcast. We'll pop right up. We have a Facebook page. And if you could follow us on Apple or any of these other podcast platforms. If you could subscribe or follow, whatever is appropriate, it really helps move us up the charts when people are looking for a Philadelphia Flyer podcast, which is what we are, even though we're a podcast. So until next time, everybody, take care.